Welcome to the Founder Hour podcast. I'm your co-host, Pat, and on today's episode, we sit down with David Rogier. He's the founder and CEO of MasterClass, an online education platform where users can learn pretty much anything from top experts in their field, including Serena Williams, Martin Scorsese, Hans Zimmer, Wolfgang Puck, Bob Iger, and many more. We chat about everything from David's childhood and early career, his thoughts on the current state of education and what the future looks like, his approach to finding business ideas, how he ultimately got the idea for MasterClass, his biggest learnings and takeaways after 7 years of running the company, and much more. Here we go.
So I was raised in Los Angeles. I was a very curious kid, so I asked lots of questions. I stutter and always have, and it was worse as a kid. And so I was teased in school for it. But my parents had this expectation that wasn't going to be allowed to be an excuse. So when they had friends over, the expectation was that I would sit with them and their friends and engage in the discussion. And the impact of that was, it was very clear that the lesson I had to take from that was I'm not going to let how I speak to prevent me from doing something that I want to do. So that was great. The other impact that had was I thought adults always wanted to hear my opinions. When you're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, most adults do not want to hear your opinions and thoughts. So in school, I would ask lots of questions, but I was often then, asked to stop or to not talk as much. So I got in trouble for, not always agreeing with my school teachers. So that was a big part of my childhood. And then childhood too, I was entrepreneurial. So I started small businesses or small jobs, post signs around my neighborhood, offering to do work. And so even as a kid, I remember, picturing myself as an entrepreneur and what would my office look like. I didn't know what it was, right? I didn't know what it really meant, but it was always something that it was always something I was thinking about.
Yeah, and David, I would love to delve deeper into some of those small businesses and what those were and how they came to be. I remember when I was going to law school, we were studying trial law and like litigation, and one of the movies that they quoted, I believe, I could be wrong, it was either A Few Good Men or My Cousin Vinny. I think it was both
A Few Good great Men. Movies.
Both great movies. And the reason I bring it up is because there was someone, I think there was an attorney in there who would stutter while he was giving his opening argument or his closing argument. He stuttered, and I'm pretty sure it was A Few Good Men.
No, it was in My Cousin Vinny.
Okay, I
really hate that scene. Scene. And they ended up to not go with him because he stutters. Which, like, anytime I watch that movie now and I love the movie, I always fast forward that part. It's hard for me to watch.
But let me tell you why. It was interesting that he brought that up. So he said that, and we were talking about just how to communicate, and they said as a result of the stutter, you had to listen to him, right? Because you didn't know what was coming next, and it was kind of a lesson in like just slow it down, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of like speeding up and just trying to rush through your argument, really let the people and not anticipate, but let them wait for what's to come, right? Let them be patient a little bit. I'm curious, when you were growing up or even now, has that stutter played a positive role or a negative one for you?
Yeah. I mean, look, I wish I was in control of how I said things more, right? Or I could control when I want to pause and not, right? So from that aspect, I would rather be able to control it. I think the positive aspect of it, right, is the empathy it brings you. I mean, not being able to express yourself is a feeling you feel a lot as a stutterer, but it's also something that you could feel because of your gender, because of your race, or your position, like a lot of other reasons. And that, I think, really helped me on empathy for anybody who can express themselves, right? Or being judged not on what they want to be judged on. I felt like I was often judged on how I said something versus on the content of itself. So I think that empathy was played a positive role in my life. But I don't wish it upon anybody.
For sure.
But you mentioned that plus the combination of being at the dinner table with adults and them realizing like you weren't just there to like provide your opinions or like talk too much. It was just kind of like you're sitting at the table, but they were adults and they were doing their thing. Did that cause you to be more like reserved and just like not as expressive and open as a kid? Or because you strike me as like a really extroverted dude that like I'm sure you get a lot of energy from being around people. But was that a difficult thing for you?
No, I think I really liked it actually, right? I was like, here are people that, or here's a chance for me to say what I'm thinking about. So no, I think I was always very extroverted. I think it made me less like less anxious around adults or less anxious to share my thoughts or opinions. So that I think was really great. But to your point, like in school, a teacher would give their thoughts and I would raise my hand. They'd be like, yes, David. I was like, I don't agree with you because of X, Y, and Z. And that isn't what they want to hear in second grade. Right. Yeah.
No, I feel you. I think I had a very similar experience. I remember vividly, there was one occasion. Well, there was many, but there was one vivid one that I haven't forgotten. It was in first grade. And the English teacher would spell like words on at the time chalkboard, and we would have to write them down, and then we would have a spelling test or whatever. And I remember she spelled the word garage, Garaje, and I mean, I thought I was a pretty smart kid, but I'm like, I know how to spell garage, and so I raised my hand. I was like, whatever her name was, I was like, garage is spelled with the Garage. She's like, never correct me again, principal's office, and I'm like, okay, like I was trying to do you a favor, but like, okay, fuck you.
I mean, that is horrible.
Yeah, so I went to the principal's office. He's like, what did you do again? And I told him. He just starts laughing. He's like, if you want, you could hang out here. If you want, you could go to the classroom. But it was always this thing of questioning authority, right? Yeah. Or like, why is it done this way? Why can't it be done better, right? Yeah. But at the time, you don't know that's entrepreneurial, or you don't know that's like curious. You're just like being a kid. How do you think, looking back, that's played, an important role for you, always having to question whether it's yourself or others around you or your team? Talk to us about that.
I think that's the worst part of the education of the school system is this idea that I think it was Noam Chomsky. I'm trying to remember who said that education in the States is obedience training, right? And I mean, you got in trouble for saying something, right, or for questioning, or for correcting, or anything like this. And I think that questioning is one of the most important skill sets that we can develop. I have this frustration about why we think education stops after post college, right? Why education stops post college? I don't understand that. I mean, that is a fourth of your life. What about the education for the rest of your life? And in part, I think what drives that is that it used to be that the rate of change was very slow. It used to be what our parents learned in school would last them for their entire career, their entire life. That is no longer the case. Not only is the rate of change increase, it's accelerating. And so one of the skill sets I think we need to learn most in school is how to ask questions and what questions to ask, and be open to the fact that we aren't going to always be right. And that's okay. The point is to actually learn from it.
Right.
So you mentioned you were entrepreneurial as a kid, but was there like some other career path or something that you thought you would go down, or from the beginning you were like, I'm going to eventually start my own business and that's it?
No, so I started some stuff like as a kid in high school. Then I thought I would run for office. So I interned on the Hill. I interned in my state senator, and I realized that most people I met were not interested in making the world better. They were intrigued by power. And I didn't care about that. And so I realized that wasn't going to be it. And then I was trying to figure out if I could use markets to actually solve problems, and realized the impact there could be potentially just as big. Yeah.
And
So I went
this is something you did, David. Was this something you were doing after college, or this is after high school, before college?
I mean, intern. I'm trying to remember for sure in college.
Right.
I think I also did it in high school too. If yeah.
Got it. Yeah. What beyond beyond work? I mean, what were things that deeply interested you? Like, what was something that as a teenager or even early days in college, like, what were you passionate about? Or like, not? I guess the word passion is tough because you don't know it's a passion. But what did you really enjoy, whether to do or to consume or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, I was always bad at hobbies. It's always been hard for me to get into them. I don't know. I wish I could. It's always been hard for me. But there are fields and things that always interest me, and I would devote tons of time to. In undergrad, I got exposed to economics, and that like rocked my world. Like that was a new way of understanding parts of the world, and that was really neat. So I went ultra deep there. Wrote papers, went to different parts of the world to present them. I was always, I think for me, I get a high when I learn whenever I learn something new. So it was always this like quest to learn brand new things. In high school, the first time I was exposed to the internet, I mean, that like rocked my world. Like I can remember that in the first time I wrote some HTML code and I saw it on the screen and I was like, whoa, I could do that. Right. And that was really changing for me. So there's tons of things I've gone deep on, I'm interested in. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
No, it definitely did. I mean, and I'm curious, you said you grew up in LA. Right. How was your experience going to school in Missouri?
Yeah, that was a shock. I grew up in LA. When I grew up in LA, I would vowed I was never going to work in the entertainment industry. That is clearly not true. I also grew up thinking we were poor. And it wasn't until undergrad when I saw income statistics where I realized, whoa, our family was not poor. I was just raised around tremendous amount of wealth. So that was really eye-opening to me. And in Missouri, parts where I went to school has a very high poverty rate. I think it's 3x where it's 3x there compared to everywhere else in the country, at least at the time. So just the level of folks that were struggling was something I had never seen at that level. Yeah, but I got in terms of education, I think I got world-class school. I learned a tremendous amount there, and really great teachers.
What kind of student were you? Like, if you were to kind of look
at
yourself,
the one.
Wow. But elaborate on that. You mentioned just that curiosity and kind of authority and that kind of stuff. But kind of elaborate on it's. I mean, I'm assuming you were pretty good with your grades because you ended up going and having a great career. And I don't know, maybe you weren't, but you tell us.
I wasn't in high school. I wasn't great grades. Undergrad, I wasn't great grades until probably the end. And the big thing for me was I had to learn that there was a distinction between learning a lot and getting good grades, and those are not always aligned. And I realized that there was a craft to getting good grades. So, for example, I'll share with you. In my first class in undergrad, it was in political science, and we got it was a huge class because it's an intro class, right? It's a big class. And we get our first test, and I write my thoughts, my answers, and I get a bad grade. I can't remember what I got, but it was a bad grade. And I went to the TA, and I was like, "Wait, I don't understand. What I answer this. I read all the materials of this," and he's like, "You have your opinions in these." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "That's not what I wanted. I wanted you to regurgitate what we had taught you." And I'm like, "Well, that's easy, but that. What's the point? There is no thinking there." He's like, "I didn't ask for what your thoughts are." And I was like, holy smokes. Right. And that probably took, even though I heard it, I rejected it. I didn't like what he said. It probably took me a couple years to be like, like here's what they actually look for and want. So that was one transition. I asked questions all the time in class. Every teacher I've ever had knows they know me. It does. I don't mean that they like me, but they know me because I would talk a lot in class. And one of the times I remember was after the first year, and I think it was rough for me the first year because I was like, hey, I'm not being pushed on how I think. I'm being taught things. So I'm supposed to just write those down again. So I went to the associate dean or something, and I complained. And she's like, okay, you want to be pushed more. I'm like, yeah. She's like, next quarter, you come to me and I will pick your classes. And I was like, fine, deal. And so I went to her next quarter and she picked the classes I was going to take, and I got my ass kicked. Those were teachers and classes that pushed how I thought. And I realized, like, A, there's an art to grades. There's also an art to picking the right professor to learn from and who you're going to learn from. And I thank her every day.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because it was like, you were learning like, politics, or you had classes in politics, but it is a lot of politics when it comes to like classroom environments. You have to sort of play by the rules, and it's not always conducive to learning. Like, to your point, it's not the best way to learn.
Yeah. I know a lot of people like love motivational quotes and the quotes in general. We do it on our Instagram, and I'm getting to a point. It's kind of a transition, I would say, but one of the quotes I heard, I think it was like in the middle of college. We both went to USC, and I was lucky enough to even get in just because I was not a good student in high school, even though I thought I was intelligent. I was just not good in class. And somebody once told me, they're like, Nair says, don't let school get in the way of your education.
That was Mark Twain, I think.
Mark Twain. Yeah, he didn't tell me, unfortunately. Somebody else told me. But I was like, damn, like that is deep. And so I was like, fuck school, that's it, we're done. We're going to go learn on my own. And I didn't drop out, but it just got me thinking like, wow, this isn't the end all be all, right? Like, I'm just here because that's what I'm quote unquote supposed to do, but that's not necessarily what I should be doing or what I need to do, right? And so that's when I started to explore things that I enjoyed personally, and there were plenty of things I enjoyed. And so that's what I kind of focused on. And my grades suffered, but I felt like my network was growing as a result. My mind was growing and expanding into new things, and continues to do so, right? So I'm curious for you, it seems like you were the exact same way, right? Where school got in the way of your education. But, with that in mind, what did you think, or what did you end up doing after, you were in Missouri?
Sorry. When you said
after you graduated college, yeah.
I mean, I was going to say, sorry, just to add on there. I think school can get in the way of your education. You can. It just takes work, and nobody's going to tell you the rules, and you have to figure out yourself. You can get school and education to work for you, and there's a massive amount. So, like, after that dean helped push me to classes, all of a sudden I discovered, hey, I need to lean into anything that's hard and scares me, right? And so the professors, the classes I don't know anything about, or like I'm not sure about, or ones that everybody says is hard, are the ones I'm going to take because those are going to push me. And you find the teachers and professors that love that you ask questions, that love you have thoughts for, and are going to push you on it. So I actually think the education I ended up to get there in undergrad was fantastic, but it took me a while to learn how to take advantage of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And I think there are tips and tricks and rules of how to take advantage of your education.
Here's one example of like the mindset. It's like you go to college because it's quote unquote the thing to do, right? And the whole idea is you go to college, you get a degree, and then you can perhaps get a good job in whatever field you want to get into, right? And so, but the thing is, the reality is that it is a very expensive investment to go to like a 4-year institution. And so when you're in that environment, you just want to maximize it, right? And if you come out, if you do everything that you want to do, right? You don't sort of try to get good grades or try to get a degree that's going to, help you get a good job, then it's like, well, where's the ROI? Why did I just spend all this money? And now it's, I learned, but that's not what people see when they're evaluating, like employers see when they're evaluating me. So it's kind of this tough balance where it's like, I'm sure there are a lot of people who want to learn the most and grow in college, but they're sort of trying to balance it out with how do I also get good grades and show that I was a good student, because that's what I'm being evaluated on.
Yep, it's really hard. I think I have like strong thoughts here. I think getting good grades undergrad helps you for your first job. After that, it stops mattering, right? Now, what school you go to, people still care about, but every year you do more and achieve more, it becomes, it's less important of a signal. I think the neatest part about undergrad, right? And, if you're lucky enough to be able to afford to go and get in a school that, that you want to go to, is it is 4 years of your life where you can devote to expanding your mind about things that you don't know about by people at that school who know more than you do. And the hard part, to your point, is like, okay, but I still got to get good grades and I got to get a degree in something that I think I can get a job in and all that. But to not seize that opportunity, to me, is a waste, because I could dive deep into economic history or trade theory in a way that it is very hard to do after school, right? The hard part, to your point, is like, how do you take advantage? How do you know those things that you don't know yet that you like? And so I think your first job is like in college, your first year, I would say go as wide as possible to experience and take a bunch of random classes so you can start being like, ooh, I like that. Oh, I like that. Oh, I hate that.
But you mentioned going to college and learning from obviously people who know more than you do, and hopefully these professors have that breadth of knowledge that you could learn from. But so I was a business major, right? And sometimes with classes like economics, for example, it's pretty simple. Like you learn economics, like that's what it is. But sometimes there are classes like, for example, entrepreneurship or things that are a little bit harder to teach. It really matters who your professors are. And so I was naturally skeptical as well. Like I was always skeptical of certain things that I was learning, because I felt like I could be learning from someone even better in that moment, where someone who perhaps had more success in the real world. It's kind of like that, A students work for C students and B students work, that whole thing. And so that, it's an interesting point, but I just feel like for so many years, the system, perhaps it depends on what the major is and what you're learning, but the system, it doesn't work. It's not a one size fits all model.
I agree. And there's tons wrong with it, right? And ways I would change it and improve it, right? Hands down. It's very hard and takes luck, chance, and money to be able to get a good education, right? Which is a part that I think is messed up.
Mm-hmm. So you graduate from undergrad. What do you do next?
It was really hard to get a job because I studied econ and politics, right? Because I said I wanted to potentially run for office or go into politics. So every job interview I'd go to, they're like, "Why don't you work at like the Brookings Institute?" And you're like, "No, like I want a job. I want to work for a company. Your company." They're like, "I just don't believe you," and that was like really hard, right? And so, one of the only jobs I could get out of school was working at a company, an industrial parts company called MasterClass. It's a fascinating business. It was like one of the only jobs I can get. I was there for a year. And then I got it was in ops. So like in the operations and supply chain, which is not an area I thought I'd ever be interested in. Then I get asked to interview for a job at Tesco. So they are launching a chain of grocery stores in the United States to sell food that is healthy in basically food deserts. So to make it cheap to buy healthy food, which like kind of rocked my world. So I went and joined them. It was pre-launch. And I remember I walked in for a job interview. And I walked in and it was chaos. People were were all running around. There was food like everywhere that they're trying, sampling. I was like, I love this. There was something about that energy of like creation that like I became addicted to and just hooked on. So I went there and we launched over 200 stores, and I then ran basically a quant math team that did ops and supply chain.
Did you enjoy that? Coming from someone who's studying like politics and economics, and now you're like running supply chain logistics, like it's a lot more I don't want to call it less creative, but it's a lot more different than being in politics and
also even like
policy and stuff.
Also, even like being entrepreneurial when you're a kid, because there is no blueprint for that. You're just sort of all over the place. But now you're sort of in a structured environment. So was that tough for you?
I mean, the first job was tougher for me, right? It was very, that was tougher for me. The second job, I loved it. And what I came to understand and realize, and this probably took me a little beyond that, I think that the first 10 years of your career, and I'd be curious how you guys think about this too, is about figuring out what great looks like, feels like, and smells like. And you got to work for a bunch of different people and a bunch of different jobs to understand that. Because at first, and I remember this, if somebody does something the same way that I would do it, I'm like, that is great. The next time somebody does something that isn't how I would do it, which is like the next level, right? But in a way I understand, I'm like, oh, that is great. But the third level then is somebody does something that you're like, I don't understand it. And the outcome is great. And you're like, ooh, I have a lot to learn, right? In each of those steps, you're learning a lot more. And I think your first 10 years of your career is figuring out what great looks like. When we launched that chain of stores, I got such a wide range of experience working with such a wide range of folks. I saw a lot of different folks, and I got to understand that's what a great CMO looks like. That's what a great executive looks like. This is what a bad one looks like. And I just learned a tremendous amount. But I'd be curious how you guys feel about it in first 10 years of your career.
No, for sure. And it's funny because like it's something I've thought about, and I don't know if this is like a famous quote or something, but it just like came to me one day. It was like, the more you know, the less you know. It's like the more exposed you are to like, just different people and different the way they go about their work and the level of like greatness that exists out there. As confident as you might be as a person in the workforce, like you realize like, you don't know anything. And so you're just sort of in this path of discovery where in the process, you're growing at the same time. You're realizing like, I still don't know anything.
Exactly. And that bar keeps raising for yourself because you're like, ooh, I want to be as good as that person. I want to be as good as that person, because you realize I'm not as good as that person is, right? And you think that you know a lot at first. When you get exposed, people know more. You're like, ooh, I do not know a lot.
Right. Yeah. So to kind of go and answer your question, I guess me and Pat have had different experiences. For me, like, I graduated law school, what is this, 2020? So it's been like 3 years now. But, I've had a bunch of internships before that, political, legal, business, whatever. But when I started working and actually getting paid, like I worked for like a solopreneur essentially. And so that's a completely different experience. And, you see how spread thin they are. And I mean, like for me, it's enjoyable because you're like, oh, you're running around doing all this stuff. It's fun. You're being exposed to a lot of people, a lot of different businesses. And like we were in the hospitality and consulting kind of field. So that was great. But at the same time, you're like, how does this thing scale? Right. Like, cause I'm thinking I want something to build beyond myself. And that's tough. Next job, I was like, wow, this is one of the worst I've ever worked for, and like probably the worst anyone's ever worked for. And like I hated every single minute I was ever there. But it taught me a lot about how not to be in every single aspect, how not to lead, how not to hire, how not to fire, how not to grow, how not to, do marketing. I mean, literally, I could write a book on how not to do business and do the opposite of everything we did, right? Which I think is a great lesson in and of itself. But that also gave me the perspective that, the culture matters. Whether I'm building my own company or going to go work somewhere else, the culture is a super important part of everything. Because look, at the end of the day, the product that you're building or the idea that you have, everyone can have those ideas. You could bring the right people to build something. But if those people don't get along, if those people don't truly believe in what they're doing in their work, and they're not excited to be there, they're not excited to help you win, right? Like, David, you're an entrepreneur, you're the boss, you're the founder. But if everybody else on your team doesn't want you to win, you're going to lose. I don't care how smart you are, right? So for me, that's a huge thing. That was a huge lesson that I took for granted, honestly. I was like, I'm getting paid a good amount, whatever. It's a cool thing I'm doing. Fuck that. Like, honestly, it doesn't matter.
I completely agree. This is why, like, when you see this in tech where they're like, drop out of school and just start something early on, that's the way to go. Okay, that can work a small amount of time. But I actually think the other path is totally okay, because to your point, those first jobs, you learn what not to do. You learn from other people's mistakes, people you don't want to hire or employ. So you can still be a successful entrepreneur and not drop out and not say, I'm not going to school, I'm not going to work, I'm just going to start something. Sometimes the work, you're going to learn something that's going to help you be an entrepreneur.
1,000%. And I think that, look, I've kind of gone back and forth. Pat and I talk about this all the time. Like, do you work for someone? Do you not work for someone? I think the answer is really like, it's related to your current moment in time. Like,
Yep.
In 5 years, I might want to do my own thing and build a completely separate business from what I'm doing right now, because I've just had an idea in 5 years in 2025, and I'm like, that's it. I'm ready. Let's make it happen, right? Versus you're 18 years old. You've basically experienced not much beyond maybe listening to podcasts, watching YouTube videos, hearing from other people, but you haven't felt it. I mean, it's tough. Like being a leader, right? I think about it during this pandemic. It's very tough to manage. Like Pat and I were talking about this recently about, do people go back to the office or not? I'm sure we can talk about it later. Or, school, do you go back to school or not? At the end of the day, for me, the answer comes down to culture. It's being around people. Like, it's so different. Like, yes, this is a great conversation, but I guarantee if it was in person, it was going to be so much better because our energies are in the room, right? I'm not going to try to get like cosmic on us because I'm not. But that's it's just so different. So I think that actually feeling it and going through it and having that experience, or it helps a lot. I mean, you can't create time. That's the one thing you can't create.
On the topic of just like entrepreneurship and folks who end up starting companies, one thing that I'm always fascinated by, and we talk about it all the time, and I know people listening are probably like, oh my God, he's going to bring it up again. But it's this topic of exposure, and it's something that it's so interesting to me because, looking back at people's stories and when they were younger, like the things that they were exposed to and how that sort of leads to where they are today. But also like on the flip side, and is an argument definitely is that there's this whole thing about ignorance is bliss, right? Like, is there such thing as knowing too much to the point where it stops you from doing certain things? Because there's a lot to be learned just by doing. So I'm curious what you think about that. Like when it comes to just entrepreneurship, how do you know when it's like, I don't know, you should stop sort of learning, quote unquote, even though you never stop learning, but just learning and not doing versus doing and learning. You know what I mean?
It's really hard. It's a really hard line. And I'm going to tell you about my own experience in it, right? And we were able to dive into it. It's really hard. I think as a general rule of thumb, there is no general rule of thumb. Like you have to just develop that sense yourself, to develop other people in your world that are going to tell you. It just totally depends. There are people who have been deep in the craft for decades and then launch something in there. And then there's people who are completely brand new to something. I don't think there's a rule of thumb to it.
Yeah.
I don't.
Okay. So you're at Tesco.
Yeah.
And you're there, I think for a few years, and then you end up going to business school. You go to Stanford, get your MBA. Tell us why you decided to do that and what your experience was like in business school, because I'm assuming it was very different than your undergrad experience.
Yeah, I get to Stanford. I get into Stanford. Am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Yes, I already did multiple times.
Okay, good. I got to Stanford, and I was like, holy shit, because I mean, there's a part of me that didn't think like I'd ever get into a Stanford, right? Like I wasn't a good student, right? And so like there's some part of that was just like I couldn't believe it, right? I go Stanford. I get a yes. I'm like, hell yeah, I'm going. I go, and it was life changing. I mean, it was hands down life changing. And I think there's a couple of things that were just life changing about it. One was, I was exposed to career paths and types of people I just had never met before. I mean, I was a supply chain guy for years, right? And these were careers and professions that like those companies did not come to my undergrad to recruit, right? I didn't have friends who did that stuff, right? That was completely new to me. And I was trying to think, back to our conversation about how do I maximize this? I'm here for 2 years. So once in a lifetime opportunity, how do I maximize this? And I remember I asked somebody who I should talk to, and they told me the person I need to go talk to is Tristan Walker. I don't know if you guys know Tristan Walker. It's an amazing story. So he was a year ahead of me in grad school. And so I went and talked to him, and I was like, what is your advice? And he's like, okay, I'm going to tell you a life story. So Tristan Walker at the time, this was like towards the end of his business school series, but he wanted to work at Foursquare, which at the time was like the hot startup. Everybody wanted to work at Foursquare. So he applies on the web. He doesn't hear anything. Somebody intros him to somebody who works there. He's not hearing anything back. So he finds the email address of the CEO and shares with it and writes him a cold email. He doesn't hear back. He writes him again. He doesn't hear back. He writes him again. He doesn't hear back. He writes him again. This is 4 times. Okay, I have chutzpah. I would have stopped after 4. Tristan keeps doing it. I think it's like 8, 9, doesn't hear from him. So he's like, you know what? I'm just going to start to do work for him. So he starts calling different companies and says, hey, he's not saying he's an employee of Foursquare, but asking, would you want to run ads on Foursquare? And he gets 3 organizations to say yes. So then he writes back an email to the CEO, I got you 3 advertisers for Foursquare. And the CEO is like, who are you and are you free tomorrow? And he's like, sure. And he hops on a plane. He goes out, flies them. He becomes their first head of BD, right? And I was like, okay, that is a story of like hustle and grind and taking advantage of things. So I asked her, okay, what is it you think I should do to take advantage of Stanford? And what he said, which I thought was so great, I think this applies to like almost any place that you're at, is write down a list of people that you want to meet and find a way to meet them. And so I wrote down people that I thought I could learn from tremendous amount. And like, this was entrepreneurs, this was people in politics and economics. And I invited them to come speak at Stanford, to come eat at a meal. I got one person say yes, so I can invite other people. And you just like, that was a way that I got to take advantage of the schools. And I've been doing that, I mean, ever since, right? Because I realized that was such a powerful way for me to learn.
And it's an interesting thing that you bring up because such a big part of the college experience is that physical aspect, right? Of like being around just really smart people and people that are doing things and getting to meet them and collaborate or just become friends. And that obviously pays dividends for your whole career and your whole life thereafter. But now with obviously like a lot of things moving online and obviously we'll get into MasterClass, but I'm curious, like outside of that, what were some other positive things that came out of like perhaps your classes, or were those things that you thought that you could have just done online and mainly the biggest experience was that in-person aspect?
I mean, I love in person, right? And I think in person help. I mean, there's a lot of great things like in person. Just the closeness you can get to people, right? The casual, unplanned, calm discussions and conversations. I am an extrovert, so I am energized by other people in the room, and that's not happening over Zoom, right? I wanted to learn things I didn't know about. I took a sales organization class. I knew I wasn't going to work in sales. That is like not interesting to me. That sales organization class was awesome. I learned how sales organizations are run. So like that was a world I didn't know anything about, right? I took some law classes. You know, there's people here on this podcast that know much more about law than I do, but that was like an exposure to things I didn't know about. So that was just real. That was neat. And a lot of people there I met, I'm still close friends with, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, David, who was on that list of people that you wanted to meet?
That's a good question. It's a really good question. It was a long list. I wanted to, I'm trying to think of some really good ones. I wanted to meet, the CEO of OkCupid, Sam Yegan, who's so smart and really interesting guy. At the time, it was, I think, the CEO of Cisco. It was some self-driving car folks. The only one I emailed and I think wasn't able to come and said no to me was Aaron Sorkin. He was busy tonight, but now Aaron Sorkin has a MasterClass, so it's all come full circle. He wrote it. Yeah.
It sounds like it was mostly like folks who were like CEOs or founders, right? Like, was there any reason for that, or was it just like I want to go for the?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think felt that gravitational pull there. I was excited. There's something about that I learned at Tesco, that creation from nothing to something was exciting to me. Entrepreneurs I find are fascinating people to talk to because they have strong points of view. They're not afraid to break rules and the orthodoxy and conventions, yet they're usually, now there are exceptions to this, quite more on the, there are exceptions to this, but I gravitate towards the ones that are quite humble because they've been through a lot and they've had amazing times, but also rough times. And that breeds a sense of like, I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic, but I also know the life is tough.
So when you talk to these people and you kind of were exposed to them now and you got to see what everything's all about, right? For the 2 years you're spending time with these incredible minds and incredible people and meeting such, cool visionaries. Did you at this point know what you're going to be doing after, or was it again tough to figure out what's next?
I didn't know. I knew I probably wanted to go in tech. I knew I wanted to help build something or create something, but I didn't know what. I didn't know how. At the time and still today, most MBAs get shit that they aren't entrepreneurs or they shouldn't be entrepreneurs because like MBAs are very risk adverse. And so like, then especially people didn't want to hire MBAs for entrepreneurial type roles. So that was something I had to push up against. Right.
Yeah. So, I know it was a few years later that you started MasterClass after graduating, but tell us what you did in between that time, just for context.
Yeah. So, I went and worked in venture. So I was investing in startups, and investing and helping out our portfolio companies. So that's what I did. Then I missed building and creating. I went up to my boss and told him I missed building, creating stuff. And he said, propose something. So I proposed some structure. He ended up investing some amount. And obviously got a percentage and all that stuff, right? And was working on ideas. And this is the stage I think where understanding how to keep learning and when to jump to really dive in really plays a very large role.
This is before you had an idea, or did you already have the idea for MasterClass?
I did not have an idea for MasterClass. So
what was that conversation like? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, it was a few conversations. I told him I miss building stuff and I want to create stuff, and we talked about it a bunch. And then he said, propose something. So I proposed, hey, what if I work on some ideas? You invest some money, and he said, okay. And it was very generous and kind, right? I was floored.
So it was like he clearly saw something in you where he was like, I'm just going to give you money. I trust that you'll take care of it and you'll build something. We don't know what we're building yet, but just go out there and figure it out. Was that kind of like basically?
Yeah, I had some ideas, right, but I wasn't sure what. I mean, I had worked for him in the fund for a while, right? I'd known him for even longer. So it was, but it's also a seed investment firm, right? So they do first checks. So like. Now, this was like a little pre-usual, right? But like,
I was going to say, is this what's called pre-seed?
Yeah, I mean, basically, right? I mean,
soil round.
Yeah.
We're going to call it.
I mean, and it's really generous, and it meant tons to me. It's also terrifying because I am not a successful entrepreneur, right? At this point, right? I don't really have an idea, and you're excited and thrilled with this. But your next question is, what the fuck am I going to do? And, I was exploring and trying things for probably about a year. And I'll be honest, that was a dark year for me because, and that like, you can't complain to anybody about, you can't complain to anybody about it. Because anybody you complain, you're like, I got money to do whatever I want, any idea. They'll be like, I don't feel bad for you, dude. Right. So you're not getting anything on the empathy. It's completely unstructured time. And everybody you meet is like, so what is your idea? So what is your idea? So what is your idea? And, should I, there wasn't something that just spoke to me. So should I stop working on it? Should I end it? Right. Should I go back? I don't want to fail. This is a once in a lifetime chance.
What were some of those ideas? Just, yeah. So,
I knew you guys were going to go here. So I am allergic to nuts. I'm deathly allergic. I stop breathing after them. And I remember my dad was like, David, how cool would it be if you could like wave a wand over food and it would like turn red or beep if there are nuts in it? And at first I was like, yeah, that'd be awesome. Thanks. And then I was like, Dad, I need to really think about this. So I started doing some work on it, and you're like, you could actually develop some tech that like gets pretty close to it. And so I started running tests and experiments, and we got it to work like most of the time. The problem is if it's life or death, most of the time is not a good bar. And so we stopped working that. So that was like some of the ideas we're doing.
I thought you were going to say you developed like a nut. Like
that
a no nut.
Way beyond my sophistication of skill, but that would be awesome. But I actually think that was like psychosomatic. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that's gonna happen because you have this whole no meat, no chicken, like plant based or whatever. So I mean, I don't know how you could create plant based peanuts since it's already plant based, but who knows? Maybe they'll create meat based peanuts.
That's very true. But if somebody gave me a shot today that said tomorrow I'm cured of this allergy, I don't think I could ever eat a nut still because it's exactly. You've been so trained my entire life that equals death.
Right.
Yeah, it's traumatic.
David, I'm curious. There's a lot of people. Funny enough, that during this whole pandemic, even yesterday, somebody texted me in, and I was just shocked at this person because they were asking me something about an idea, and I was like, "Is this your idea or is this somebody else's idea?" And he's like, "No, it's my idea." And I was surprised because this person is just so corporate, and I was like, "What's happening? You're thinking entrepreneurially finally." And he's like, it's just not fulfilling to be at this corporate job, and I don't feel like I'm really using going and using my potential. And so a lot of people, I think, during this time are, even though they don't have that money like you did, or maybe they do, they're using this time to think and get creative. But I'm curious, and perhaps this is helpful to those thinkers. What process did you use to come up with ideas? Was it you're just laying around watching TV? Oh, there's an idea, or going out walking. There's an idea, shower idea, or were you purposely brainstorming?
This is one of the parts of entrepreneurship that I find the most anxiety producing is finding that idea. You want to be an entrepreneur, there's some itch to it, but how do you figure out that idea, and then how do you pick that idea? I realized, or what I did was I did a bunch of ways to approach it. And I did things like, what are my own needs? What are needs of other people that I'd be interested in, right? So I posted ads on Craigslist, offering to pay people just to talk to them about their needs in certain areas, or what they liked and didn't like. I looked at trends, right? I started to create all these different things. And I realized one of the most important parts for me was coming up with what are the principles you're going to use to make a decision. And one of the principles for me that ended up being so important was choosing something that even if it fails, you are going to be proud of it. That to me was a constraint. And I think one of the most important things and advice I give to anybody listening is pick your constraints. Not a lot of them, but pick one or two of them. And for me, that was one of them that got all the Salesforce optimization ideas out. And it was going to be something that I really cared about.
Yeah. So talk to us about that moment when you thought about, was it a moment or was it a series of moments when you thought about MasterClass, and what was it at the very beginning?
I also think this is a myth. People are like, there was a light bulb and all of a sudden the idea came. I usually think when you dig in, and you guys are the pros of this, you dig in, it's usually a series of things and it kind of evolves over time, right? So for me, it was a couple things. One, I posted ad on, I got that constraint of choosing something that even if it fails. And that made me really think about what that is. So I was raised in part by my grandmother. And so I would often stay with her after school and stuff like this. And so I remember going to her house one day. I was in second grade, so however old you are, and 8, 9, something like that. And I was complaining to her about the math homework I had, which obviously I didn't have a lot because I'm 8 years old. And she tells me that she has a story she wants to tell me, which is the last thing you want to hear when you're a kid. She tells me the story. When she was 16 years old, she was living at the time in Krakow, Poland. Her and her mom go on a family vacation. Dad's going to join, stays home a couple extra days to finish some work. While they're on vacation, the Nazis invade. They take everything and they kill her father. She flees to New York City. Only job her mom gets on a factory floor. They're working the factory floor side by side. My grandma decides she wants to become a doctor. Finds every medical school in the state of New York, applies them all by hand, gets a no from every single one. Keeps working the factory, applies again next year, gets a no from every single one. Starts calling the deans of admissions and asking, why am I not getting in? They all hang up on her, except for one guy. He says, I'll be honest, you have 3 strikes against you. You're a woman, an immigrant, and you're Jewish. Hangs up the phone. She keeps working the factory, applies again next year. She gets into one school and becomes a doctor. And I'm staring at her because this is intense shit to be hearing from complaining about math homework. And my grandma tells me, David, the point I'm trying to make you is education's the only thing that someone can't take away from you. That stuck with me like a rock. And I realized, okay, this is my one chance. Doing something that's I'm going to be proud of if it fails. I'm going to build something that people can't take away from others. I'm going to do something that helps people learn. posted the ad on Craigslist again, talking to people just about their education, their schooling, heard a bunch of needs, started thinking about myself. Why I love to learn. Why don't I take classes online? How come I don't like those online classes? What are things I do like? I started to mock stuff up. Started running, I mocked up mocks of what the site could look like. I put it in front of people, asked what their reactions and thoughts were to it. And it started evolving. And then you're like, hey, what if it could be like the best people in the world? And you start thinking about that. You're like, well, if Aaron Sorkin taught a master class, even though I would never write a screenplay, I have no interest in that. I would take that class. That would be amazing. And it just started kind of evolving like that, to the idea like, holy shit, if we can get the best in the world to teach, and if we can make it engaging as watching a movie or film, that could actually make it possible for anybody to learn from the best. And that's like kind of how it evolved.
Right. Because I can imagine, this was like around 2013-ish?
2012, end of 2012 and 2013. Yep.
Oh, I don't know if I remember correctly, but I'm sure there were like other online just websites that you could go and learn from just anyone.
There were MOOCs. Yeah. So at the time there were MOOCs. Most of them were a webcam in the back of a classroom. They were taking education system from 100 years ago, putting a webcam back of it and being like, that's an online class. That's crazy idea now. Right.
Right. Yeah. And MOOCs, for those that are listening that don't know, are massive online open courses, which, there are different platforms, but essentially that's what it is, where a bunch of people can tune into the same content. So you were thinking, all right, I'm going to go after the best of the best. I'm going to find the best people for each of these topics or each of these classes, and have them teach it. So what was the first?
You would never get access to, people you would never learn from, which I think is unfair, and saying, hey, here are people that are the best in they're not maybe the best school teacher of it, but they are the best at that craft. And now everybody's gonna be able to learn from.
Right. So there's a bunch of stuff going on here, right? Like you're thinking, I'm going to build a platform, right? And there's a few different parts of this platform. There's going to be the people who are going to learn and get educated. There's going to be people who are going to teach. And now it's your sort of job to go find, this is whole chicken and egg thing, right? With any platform is like, who do I go after first? Do I go after the audience that's going to be paying for classes, or is it going to be the folks who I'm paying to teach? So what is your first step? Like, what did you end up doing once you figured out this is what I want to do?
I made a list of what are my hypotheses, and then I figured out a way to test them. And this is something I think, like, I think you can test so many of your core assumptions without having to build stuff. So, like, you think about the hypotheses, like early on, it was like, okay, am I going to get these people, or like the big questions you have to answer, or like, I'm going to be able to get these people to actually teach. Okay, I have to prove that. I can make nice content out of them, right? So that's good. Then I have to get people to actually want to buy the stuff. And you don't have to work in order. So like getting the instructors was the hardest part at the beginning, right? But okay, so that's really hard. So I got to work on that, but that's going to take a while. But I can start making stuff and see if I can make great stuff with it. So we filmed test classes, and we did it with my parents. We did it with friends, right? We did test classes, and you learn a lot. You're like, okay, our first classes looked really bad, right? And we needed help there, right? So we had to come up with a plan there. And you start to evolve this. All of a sudden, like you're like, okay, I can make good classes out of this. Okay, that's great. Next thing, are people going to want to do it? How can I test demand? Can I put out a poll, a survey? Can I mock stuff up? How can you do those things? And so it's all about trying to prove those hypotheses. And I think this is honestly a big hack on the fundraising side. Investors want to invest in, the less risk there is, right? Well, one way early on to decrease risk is to test your core assumptions, right? But the hardest part by far was that first one. I had to get the first people to say yes.
Mm-hmm. And were you going to them with already an idea of what they would teach, or was it more of a collaborative effort? Like, hey, we have a platform. We want you to be an instructor and teach what you know best, but we'll work together to figure out what that exactly.
I tried everything. So there were some we went sent over like a very tight thing of what your class could be on. Other ones, was much more vague because they were going to want to help shape it. I sent cold emails, cold calls. That was a year of grinding and hustling.
David, what was your mission from the get-go? Were you going out there to change education, or were you just trying to,
democratize,
just begin and do something?
Democratize genius was our mission from day one.
And did you think that you were going to be able to build something that scaled when you first began, or were you like, I have no clue where this is going to go. Let's just start and figure it out?
It's a good question. I had some clue, right? Like, I mean, I looked at how big the market can be, right? Like, I didn't want to do something that was going to, for me, that this was going to be a lifestyle business. I wanted to have large impact. And it wasn't about wealth creation, it was about impact. And so I think the proxy of a size of a company can be a proxy of impact. So I wanted that, but I think, I did a bunch of tests. I did some polling. And you're like, okay, look, I can get half the country or fourth of the country to be interested in this. If I can do that, it's a big business, right? So I wasn't as worried about TAM there. I was worried about the economics, how that would work. At the time, lots of people didn't think people would pay for high quality content, and certainly for education like this. And so that was why I had to do tests and polls and put stuff in front of people to see if they would. And I quickly saw that people will absolutely pay to improve their own life.
One of the you bring up MOOCs, and one of the things we often see with MOOCs, or just comparing it to like a traditional sort of 4-year program, is, first of all, obviously it's more accessible, more people can access that content and learn. And I would argue like you can learn. There's so much more out there through MOOCs or just other types of content, whether it's books or podcasts or whatever, to learn from, than there is in that you could learn in a 4-year environment. Like there's more information out there than what you learn in school, in your program. But, how do you see that sort of interactive aspect working when it comes to that side of things? Because there's this like, everyone is sort of learning the same thing, but it's like this one size fits all, where does everyone learn the same way? Like, I don't think so. Yeah. I think that the personalized aspect of education is super important too. So how did you think about, or do you still think about that when it comes to MasterClass?
Yeah, I think for me, so there's one is, and the pandemic is accelerating this trend. There are certain people on certain topics that you want to learn from the absolute best. And you're not going to be able to learn from them on a one-on-one setting. But you're crazy if you don't want to learn from them. So, for example, if you can get somebody who's the world's best at almost anything that you're interested in, you want to hear what they say. Now, look, it might not all work for you. You're going to have to apply it. You're going to have to practice it. So let's give an example. Let's talk about Steph Curry. If you want to learn how to shoot the basketball and become a great shooter, you're going to have to run drills, practice. You're going to shoot tons of times. You're crazy if you don't want to hear what Steph Curry has learned about how to shoot. Now, you might not agree with it. It's not going to be that is not enough to make you a great basketball player. But Steph Curry is probably the best shooter that we have seen in the NBA ever since the NBA began. And so, to me, it's understanding how they work, what things they do, what rules that they break, what hacks they came up with, is invaluable. On top of that, you then have to figure out what do you do on the in-person side, what do you do on the one-to-one side. That's why for us it's important we have a community, people in the class with you that you can learn from. There's other materials for you to learn from, but I think that's the first part is you want to be able to learn from the absolute best.
Yeah, and it's funny because like I feel like if someone was to think of a platform for teaching or like an educational platform, one of the things people probably wouldn't think about is like, how do you improve your jump shot? It's like one of those like just crazy out there things that, I'm sure like over time you figured out, but I'm curious, how do you go about, or I guess before I ask this, what have you found, over the last 7 or so years of running the company have been the types of topics that have been the most popular that people are able to take so much away from learning in this sort of way?
This is what's been fascinating to me. I think people, and there's a myth, especially in education, that you're only interested in one thing, right? That what we've seen, I think it's one of the most interesting things, is people are not they don't have one dimensional. They are multi-hyphenate and interested in lots of things. So I forgot the exact stat, but this is kind of close. I think this is close. I think if you take Steph Curry's class first, the most likely class you'll take after that, I think this is right, is Steve Martin.
Wow.
People go broad. And so because they're curious, they want to learn. And when it ends up, Steph's class, it's going to help. It's going to help you on your jump shot. You're also going to learn like how to train for things that even aren't basketball, right? How to overcome adversity. I mean, he almost did not get a scholarship, right? I mean, people thought Steph wasn't. I mean, you ask people about Steph in high school, is he going to go to NBA? People would have laughed at you, right?
He went to Davidson. He didn't go to like a like a top D1 college.
And I mean, how Steph practices and trains is mind blowing. Right? I mean, he does things, and you guys have probably seen clips of this if you're a basketball fan. He will dribble a basketball with one hand. The other hand, he'll take another ball and just throw it up in the air and down. And you're like, what is going on? Why are you doing that? His mind has to work on overtime to do that. So then when he's in the game is like in slow mo for him, right? He's like, I only have one ball, right? Like this is way easier, right? I mean, this is stuff that you can apply in your own life.
Yeah. I'm curious, you know, when you first started talking about when MasterClass first began, you said one of the biggest challenges was going to be finding the instructors, right? The best of the best. Yeah. But you obviously had that conversation with Tristan Walker early on. You knew that, you know, that you had to never give up to find the person you want to find, right? I'm curious, who was your first guest first guest? I'm confused with this podcast. Who was your first instructor? Yeah. And how did that eventually trickle and had that, you know, trickle down effect to everybody else?
I mean, it took a long time to sign people. So along the way, lots of people said, stop working on the idea. You have to change ideas. It's not going to work. And I was like, no, like this is going to work in science way. So the first three we got, which were all really close, was Serena Williams, Dustin Hoffman, and James Patterson. Those were the first three we got.
And how'd you get them?
I mean, they each have a story. James Patterson, I cold called and I cold emailed everybody I could find on the web. On Serena, we had pitched her agency she was at lots of times. I mean, God did close to them because the amount of times we tried to pitch. Dustin, we knew somebody in his world, right, to try to help. But I mean, the first three, you got to figure out what is it they care about, right? And what they were doing, all three of them, they had someone in their life that was a mentor that changed their life, and they wanted to give back, and they didn't care about the risk. They don't care about the money. It was like, this is good for the world. So after we started going faster. Yeah.
So like let's take Serena, for example. Like what was it that got Serena to say yes? And what sort of value was Serena going to bring to your customers, her students, right? Like, walk us through that process.
Yeah. I mean, Serena, we did lots of work to figure out what things she cared about. So in the pitch we did, right, it's, you know, doing those things and, you know, impact and reach, and is it going to be high quality, and, you know, who's going to be the audience, and, you know, her and her team are very smart. I mean, she is brilliant. And, you know, she asked lots of questions and like wanted to know a lot, right? And wanted to vet me and us and our investors and making that out. And, you know, especially early on in your first customers, the first partners you're with, I mean, they're making a bet on you, right? And you and your team. And so the more you can do to make them feel comfortable and good and safe, which is why in part it took a while, because like they had to gain that confidence. I don't come from the entertainment industry. I wasn't a successful entrepreneur right beforehand. So, I mean, I had to build up that trust. And you think of ways that you can build up that trust. Who are the people that we know? Who are there people I've met along the way that can vouch or get involved in the project, right? So one of them very early on, so we, you know, did a bunch of test shoots and I shot some stuff and it looked bad. It looked really bad. So I was asking friends for advice. And I got connected to this guy named Bill Gutentag, who's a two-time he's won 2 Oscars for doc filmmaking. So I got connected to him, really excited, right? Oh my God, like the first professional filmmaker I met. So I went up, we went out and, you know, ate with him and asking for advice. How do we shoot these? What are we going to do? You know, because our other stuff looks bad. He's like, you're not going to ask me to shoot? We're like, wait, what? He's like, this sounds kind of awesome. We're like, wait, you're willing to shoot our classes? He's like, sounds kind of awesome. And so like he shot, I think, 2 of our first 3 classes. And all of a sudden the classes look great, right? But also I got to go in the pitches and be like, hey, you're going to have an Academy Award winning filmmaker doing. And the other of the first 3 that we got was Jay Roach, who's a filmmaker who's amazing and great. And we've become close friends. And, you know, getting these people who, like, you know, you do not see on the cover but are Vogue, but are world class at what they do to involve. It just lends trust, right?
Mm-hmm. And around, in these early days when you're trying to get these first few instructors, how many people, how big was the team? Like it was you and how many others?
I mean, in the beginning it was just me. So that was for a while, just me. Then we started adding folks. So, and a co-founder came on board. So, it ranged from 1 to 3.
Okay. And I think I read somewhere, before you had even launched, you had raised a seed in Series A of around $6.5 million, which is like, I mean, you talk about having something to present to in your pitches and stuff. How can you talk to us about how like those early conversations were like with your investors? Like, how did you get that? I mean, Series A usually comes once there's like product market fit and there's like, you're sort of showing that this product is working. But what was it that you thought from the beginning, like these investors were so willing to invest before you had launched?
So the people who led our Series A were the folks at Javelin. And the person who led it is Alex Gurvich, who's wonderful. And we, the pitch to him, I guess we try to think about it along the way. It was like, okay, what things do we have to prove, right? This is going back to the very early on. What are the hypotheses? We have to get the top talent. Can they make great classes? Will people buy it? Well, when we had pitched him, we had already, I think, signed 2 or 3 instructors, and we had filmed one class. That's all we could afford, right? We couldn't afford more. But I just proved the first 2 big hypotheses. So the big hypotheses left for him, right, was like, and now of course there's more to add on, was are people going to want to buy it? And look, it was a big risk. I mean, he's taking that bet before launch, right? So he's taking a bet in me, in the team, in the idea, and the product, and like, it was this was before A, so we were still a mess. And to his credit, he saw it. I mean, and he saw the potential. And he's now he's invested more and more every single round. We've become very close. He is on our board, and he's played a very key role in building the company.
So once you start getting these first few instructors and shooting content and building out the team, how did you end up starting to get, folks to come onto the platform and pay to learn and watch, experience the content? Like, how was that just kind of, with the initial classes like super small, or like, did you fill them out right from the get-go? Like, how was that process?
It was scary. I mean, think about it. We launched in 2015, in May 2015, right? So I've been working on this for a long time. We launched on the 15th of May. I think 15, right? 12, 15. I'm trying to remember the date. We launched in mid-May of 2015. And, I think every entrepreneur who's listening to this podcast will understand this. You're like, I've poured my life and soul in this for last years. We're going to launch and everybody's going to care because this has been my life's work. And, I remember someone on the team actually got, with time with maybe like 12 people, 15 people, someone on the marketing team brought me over like a phone charger. He's like, because your phone's going to be off the hook. People are going to be calling and talking about it. We launch. First day sales are not good. I went home that day and I actually cried. And I'm not a crier. And I remember I called my parents, which is embarrassing. I'm not proud of this. I was like, what do I do? I mean, we got these big names attached. I got 12 employees. And I mean, fuck. I mean, this is the big day with launch press and, and they're like, put it on a brave face up until you figure out how to solve it. So next day I go to the office, I have a brave face on, but that is not easy. And I see someone on our marketing team who runs our paid marketing team, and he has a big smile on his face. I was like, Reed, why are you smiling? He's like, this is going to be a huge business. And I'm like, why? Because I'm looking at the numbers. He's like, have you seen the CACs I can get? Oh, we can blow this up. And day 2 sales were above day 1 sales. Day 3 sales are above day 2 sales. You're like, oh, if the curve's going to be like this, we might be okay. So probably on day 1, I thought this business was failed. On day 2, I thought we might be a big business.
I mean, you talk about the customer acquisitions costs. Why do you think that was? Why do you think people were so interested in this, right? Like, I know you had worked on it for 2 years, and so you truly believe that people should be interested in this. But hearing from your customers, eventually, what was it that they were intrigued by? What got them to click? What got them to eventually take out their credit card, go to the other room, pick up their wallet, type those 16 digits, the CVC code, whatever the hell, and purchase, right? Like, what made them do that?
Yeah, really good question. At first, it was nothing. It was something they had never seen before. Oh my God, I can learn from a Serena from Serena, right? And also early on it was curiosity and like uncertainty around it, right? But this idea that you could learn from this person, but also it looked kind of fun and interesting. It didn't look like school. It was nothing that our ad format is a movie trailer, basically, is how we think about it, right? And that you're gonna learn something, we're gonna teach you, but we're gonna make it as compelling as a movie trailer. That was an ad format that now you see it more. At the time, that did not exist, right? And that allowed us to hook people in, to explain people, right, to educate and stuff like this. But early on, it was about the instructors. It wasn't MasterClass. They didn't care. They didn't know who we were. It was about the individual classes. Once we switched, because early on we sold one class at a time, we eventually switched to doing a subscription, $180 a year. You access everything. Now people sign up because of MasterClass. They want to be part of MasterClass. They want to take classes on MasterClass. But early on, it was about each individual class.
And I know, like, for example, when Netflix started, right? Yes, they were just DVDs, but Netflix is one of those companies that end up raising their prices over time. I've read different arguments about, starting higher and then, going down as you build the customer base, or then starting lower and then building up. What was MasterClass's philosophy on that?
I have lots and lots on pricing. Number one, you should always test it. You're going to have lots of instincts. Your instincts are going to be wrong. So always test it. How we began testing was doing polls and surveys. For any of the very quant people out there, there's a way to poll. It's called a Van Westendorp model or approach. I find that really helpful. You can run ads. You can just mock stuff up and put it in front of people. And then also, price is a statement of brand. And I think people don't often talk about that when they talk about brand. Your price says a lot about your brand. So we wanted, individual class at $90. It was a whole number. We're not trying to cheap you by saying it's $99.99, right? It's a price a lot of things were not priced at, so we can kind of own that price. It's not too expensive, but not way too cheap. We wanted to do it, and I agree with what you said. You can always go down on price. It's very hard to go up. So we thought, okay, that's the upper limit. Let's and start there. And then a couple years later, or a little bit after that, we then launched $180 a year, right? Which was basically for the price of 2 classes, you get access to everything, right? And we did
so. And what is it now?
It stayed at $180.
So I want to talk about sort of what your vision is. You're 7 years in, and the company's grown immensely. But what your vision is for the future of this company. But before we do, I think it ties in well, is talk about just future of education and where things are going. And I want to hear your thoughts, because I'm very curious to what you think. Obviously with the whole pandemic, we've seen this like really rapid shift from in-person to online, where people just weren't prepared for it, and we've had to sort of figure it out along the way. But now it's kind of hopefully becoming a little bit more stabilized, and more innovation is going to happen in this area. But and we always, one of the things we hear about, again, MOOCs is like, well, it's not a full substitute for in-person education. It's like a supplement to it. You get you get your college degree, and then you can also learn different things online. But I do think that there's a lot of with all the innovation happening in this area, it could quickly shift from the traditional 4-year degree not even being what people are going after. It's more like to your point, is just education holistically. Like, it doesn't matter where you learn it, you just learn it. And so I guess what are your thoughts on where we're headed in the next maybe 5 to 10 years when it comes to this?
Yeah. The fact that we were unprepared for it, I think, to me, is like these trends were already occurring. And so, we could have prepared for a lot more, and we should have. And a lot of institutions did, right? A lot of institutions did, but a lot of institutions did not. And we're behind on it. I think it will accelerate a bunch of trends. And a lot of trends are stuff that we've already seen and just having more of. I think a couple interesting things to me in this. One is, for the first time since moms and dads were like responsible to actually homeschool parents, to be the homeschool school teachers, parents are back in the classroom. I mean, they're with their kid, hearing what's happening on Zoom. And a lot of them are going to be impressed by what their school teachers are teaching their kids and be happy, but a lot aren't going to be. And that's going to drive a wave of immense change and innovation. Nothing drives you to start a company more than having a bad experience. And so I think that's really we're going to see a whole wave for the next 5 to 10 years of new companies in ed tech that come from moms and dads.
David, to that point, one thing that, I've talked to a lot of parents about, especially, parents of younger children, is you're right. Some are super impressed. Others are the complete opposite route. They're like, what the hell is my kid learning? Right. But at the end of the day, a lot of them, they just don't like the fact that their kids are home. So, just, I guess, playing devil's advocate, like, yes, education technology will continue to improve, but how do you get kids out of the house into schools or pods or whatever you want to call them, but continue to, innovate and improve education, whether that's in person, whether that's supplemental education or whatever, right? Because at the end of the day, parents aren't necessarily only sending their kids to school for them to get educated. They're sending them to school to get rid of them for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day or whatever it is so they could go to work. So, keeping those two things in mind, and like, because I feel like just having a fully online education is beyond reality. I don't think it's realistic. So, especially at a young age. So, how do you see those two worlds converging and like ed tech and actual reality coming hand in hand?
Especially for kids, K-12, online education should 100% online education is going to be bad for almost all students. There'll be some exceptions, but almost all students. Right. A lot of what you also learn in school as a kid is socializing, interaction with peers, right? How to share, right? All those things. And if you are a kid, you are not designed. I'm not as a kid. As a human, you are not designed to sit in a chair from 8 to 4 or from 9 to 5 and crank the entire day. So I think it will change not only in schooling, but also work, right? Now, the answer is some mix and hybrid. To me, you then start pulling out what things do you want online and what things you want in person. Online part. It's a crazy idea that who you're going to learn math from is the person who is a school teacher in your zip code. Why not learn math from the best math teacher in the world? Then do ask questions, get help from the person that's in your zip code, right? And so just thinking of what stuff would you pull online and what stuff not. Khan Academy and Sal Khan, I think, was one of the first to do this, to really flip the classroom, right? Which basically said, hey, watch your lectures at home. Then in school, we're going to do the actual homework, right? So you can ask questions you can talk on. And I think we need to rethink how education is structured. Where I've given a lot of thought to is what happens to education after school. So as we talked about earlier, we think as in this country, education stops after college. That's crazy to me. You have the next 3/4 of your life. And when you start thinking about that, you say, okay, how does school or education, how we learn, change after college? One big factor is basically for the first 20 years of your life, you're required by law to sit in that chair. After that, you have choice. And so the education, how we're going to learn for that future in life, you've got to be about something that you choose to do, which means it's got to be engaging, interesting. You got to be compelled to do it. There has to be a reason. You have to enjoy it. And so that, I think, is one big push. The other big thing, which I think we have a dearth of in the research and work, and we are spending time on it now, is there are no rules like a thumb or how people think of how you learn after school. Think about that for a second. Every other aspect of your life that you want to improve, there are at least rules of thumb that we've come to understand and agree on. You should sleep X amount of time a night. You should exercise X amount of times a week. You should brush your teeth at least twice a week. How should you learn after school? There's nothing. Now, I think there's interesting stuff. It's like, how much time do you spend a week to learn about things that you already know on, but you want to go deep? How much time a week do you spend about learning things that you're going to go broad on? And this is the stuff that we are starting to work on. Because what I want MasterClass to be, and you ask me what our vision is in the future, I want to be the school for the next 3/4 of your life. That is my vision.
And I'm curious, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. There are a lot of things that we could learn in a structured school environment, like certain things that are just school is designed better for versus others, right? And so what about the other stuff, right? Like entrepreneurship is one of them.
Yep.
Some other things that, and I think that entrepreneurship specifically is something obviously you learn just by doing as much more than just like, but there's a lot that you could learn from other people and their stories and how they did it, even though there's no blueprint. But that's just one example. I don't know. Venture capital could be another example, right? Like things that, it's not, there are certain things that you might learn in school that might help you, but there's a lot that school doesn't teach you. So is that something that you think could also work?
Yeah, I think there's on a bunch of levels. I think school needs to adapt to teach you other things in life, and there's life skills that you should learn in school. Personal finance should be mandatory in every school in the country, right?
I agree.
Stuff on emotional intelligence, understanding yourself, introspection, like that stuff I think would be really great to be able to teach in school. So I think there's a bunch of practical skills, how to negotiate, how to look at a contract. You've been to law school. Looking through a contract, understanding it is something everybody should know how to do, right, and understand. So I think there's a bunch of things there. But I also think we have to be in charge of our own education and how we learn. And we got to figure out what that path is. And I think that path is understanding things that you already enjoy and you want to build a career and you're going to go deep, but it's also expanding about things that you just don't know about. Because I do believe in the strength of weak ties. And the more you know about things that you don't know about is going to improve your life in every dimension. Because you're going to be able to tie in the best things that people have learned from psychology, from history, from music, and be able to apply to your life in ways that nobody's ever pictured before, imagined before.
David, let's make your dreams come true for just a second here. You become a senator in the United States, right? You represent Northern California.
That was my dream. That was my dream.
Yeah, you represent California, not Northern California. You're just from Northern California. And specifically, you're going to work on education policy, right? That's something that you're passionate about. That's what you want to do. So, Senator David, right, what does your policy look like when it comes to education? What are the things that you would change? What are the things that you would completely get rid of? What would you mandate, right? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Okay, this is a cop-out and then after that I'll give you the real answer. This is my approach, like everything I don't know about or I'm not great at yet, is like I go talk to other people who I think know more than me that are on extremes. And I actually think part of asking advice, and there's a craft to this, is you pick people with strong points of view. Because you're not asking for their advice, you're asking for their thoughts so you can expand what your horizon is, right? So that's what I would do. But if you said, okay, let's assume all that's done, what is it?
Well, let's assume you've already done that.
Yeah. Exactly. Assume you already do it. It's a really good question. I think education shapes almost every outcome of your life. It shapes how long you live. It shapes income. It shapes healthcare outcomes. I would work my butt off to figure out the way to improve access to the top quality education. I think it is messed up that basically tax dollars go to zip codes, right? At least like in parts of the country, right? So education's funded by people who live in your district and area, which means there's certain school districts that get a lot more funds than other schools, right? I think you have to basically create one pot of money and then create the school system from that. So every school per student gets the same amount of funding. That, like, you asked me the number one thing, that's probably the number one thing I would do.
I'm curious though, like in your opinion, how do you identify the top tier of educators? Like on what basis are they the top? Is it like how successful they are in the real world? Is it how much they've studied or like accumulated in education over their life? Like how do you identify that?
How do we at MasterClass, or how like in the world would?
Well, like, how would you go about identifying it?
Yeah. It's one of the most difficult questions to answer. It's not just, and it's a problem not just in education. It's also a problem in healthcare. How do you identify the best doctor, right? It's actually very difficult. You ask most people is their doctor good? They'll be like, yeah, she is so nice and she runs on time. And you're like, that's not about a good doctor, right? And the same thing with the school teacher. You ask if the school teacher is good. They're like, he's so nice, or whatever it is, right?
Well, he's not bad. I mean, he's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. So you're good because I think so there's a bunch of ways that people try to do it, right? Some are they basically try to give you a test before you start the class and after the class, and you say how much did you learn, right? And do it. The problem with that method is that you assume you know everything that student should actually learn in that grade or that class. And that has bias because a lot of things are things about how to think about things or change how you think. And that usually goes to facts, which I don't think is important people learn. So it's really hard. One way that's happening now, right? And it's not, there's lots of different thoughts on this is you basically ask people if they think that they learned a lot. And that's what we do at MasterClass. So we basically judge a class on a bunch of criteria, but one of the questions we ask is if you learned a lot. That's one. Two, we ask, did MasterClass or this class change your life? Now that's a crazy bar to set, right? But right now about a fifth to a fourth of our students say the MasterClass has changed their life. And to me, you're asking somebody, which I know is a crazy thing in a lot of education, but I don't want to necessarily assume I know everything that you have to learn. And so this is a way where I'm putting you in charge of your education where have you learned something that has changed your life? And if so, right. Great. If not, we have much more work to do.
One of the things that I've thought about, I think would be super interesting, and I don't know if this is happening out there or if something that you guys have thought of, but a lot of what we learn in school, it's like theory and practice, right? There's two sides of it. And so, it'd be interesting, not everyone who's good at the theory part is good at the practice and vice versa. Right? There are people that are very successful in the real world that we might want to learn from, but they might not, to your point before, be able to teach a class, right? The way that's effective for people to actually learn in an effective way. So, kind of combining the two, someone who's very well studied on one topic and just knows a lot about it. And then someone who's just been successful at it, and then kind of bring those, the best of both worlds together to actually teach that content. I don't know if that's something that there's other ways to go about it, but
yeah. So our approach to this is we get the best in the world at the craft, right? So at the practitioner, we bring in other people, and they bring in other people in the world that are world class to actually teach, and we have people on the team too, right? And we craft, and it's ultimately their call and decision what goes in and what goes not. It's not in the class, but how to craft a really great class. And we bring everything that we've heard. We ask students what they want to learn, right? Things like that. And then we also, this is a big part why our classes are not live. Live is way harder. If you want to make something really compelling and great, you want to be able to edit it and change it. This is why, most of us enjoy to watch films and TV shows that aren't live. There's very few things that we like to watch live. A sports game where you want to know the result right away, or news where you want to know the result right away. Most other things are usually worse live.
Yeah. Very interesting. That's why the Founder Hour is not live.
Damn right.
Same way.
That's why radio's dying. No, I'm just kidding.
I wanted to do live, and these guys said no because they want to be able to post-produce. I'm just kidding.
We'll do it live.
No, for sure. Well, David, I think that we could probably go on for another few hours and discuss this, but I know that we both don't have that time. But thank you so much for sharing your story with us and your perspective on entrepreneurship, on business, on life, and obviously about MasterClass as well. Personally, maybe I shouldn't tell you this, but I thought before I even know the amount that you charge, I thought MasterClass was in the thousands of dollars. Because when I would think about what would I pay, I would pay probably upwards of $1,000 a year. Because we went to USC. Each fucking unit is $1,800. So when you think about it that way, and you think about that perspective, you're like, oh wow, $180 is free. But then again, you talk about accessibility, and it kind of makes sense. So. I don't want to screw other people over a bit more, but yeah.
I really appreciate that. If you want to pay a couple $1,000s, glad to charge you for it. But look, it was really important to me, and it's tied to the mission of making it possible for anybody to learn from the best. We talked about democratizing, access and genius. And so for us, it was what is the least amount of price point we can do that we can still be a self-sustaining business, right, or become a self-sustaining business.
Right. Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, thank you, David. This has been great. Hopefully we can meet in person someday soon. But all the best to you and MasterClass, and we're excited to see what comes next.
Yeah. Thank you guys. It was really a pleasure. And, thanks for helping to all of the support that you guys do to the, other entrepreneurs and founders.
Thanks, David.